Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. It is Friday, April 8th, and plenty to talk about here with Ohio State. Been a big week in recruiting, but I want to turn our attention to the NFL draft. That's coming up here very soon. We love talking about the draft. Ohio State's certainly going to put guys in the draft once again. Can you believe it? This might be a down year for Ohio State in terms of the numbers of players that's going to put into the draft, but a pair of first rounders, assuredly, unless something crazy happens. But, better than what I know, let me bring in a good friend of mine, John Vogel of Football Sapient, to talk a little bit about the upcoming draft. John, how are you doing, man?
Doing great, Kevin, and appreciate you having me on here, man.
Absolutely. And let's just get right to it. Ohio State has a pair of first rounders with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. They have a lot of similarities, yet they have a lot of differences. One of them is going to go before the other one. That's just how it works. There's no ties in this situation. Wilson and Olave, who goes first and why, in your opinion?
At this point, from everything that I've been hearing, they're very close. But I'm going to go with Wilson over Olave right now. And the reason that is because Wilson offers a whole lot more, I think, in terms of, schematic versatility than Olave does. Now, both of them played a lot across, the formations and in different, from a boundary to a slot. Now they both were moved around, but Wilson is akin to somebody who's a lot like Devontae Smith, right? Who just came out last year and was out of Alabama, went whatever the 10th or 11th overall pick to the Eagles. They're very similar because they play bigger than they are, and they're very explosive. They attack the catch point, and that's kind of what you see from Wilson more so than you do from Olave. It's just something that better fits in the NFL right now, and from everything that we've seen in the last few years. And Wilson looks like he's probably the guy that you're going to potentially go someplace at like 8 or at the latest 10 to the Jets.
You sit there and we talk so much about how guys are going to fit into their specific teams, and you want to go out there and get that number one receiver. Is Garrett Wilson a number one receiver for a team? Is Chris Olave a number one receiver for a team? We can look at somebody else who's kind of become a number one receiver just because of the situation with Terry McLaurin when he was drafted by then the Redskins, now the Commanders. That one's going to take me about 10 years to figure out how to address that team. But are both of them number one receivers? Are neither of them number one receivers? What's your view there?
I think Wilson is definitely number one receiver. And the reason that I kind of think that is because he has the ability to command, from a route running standpoint and with his explosiveness, the catch point. If you look at guys that are number one receivers, that's kind of the number one trait. You create the separation, and when you maybe get a bad throw that doesn't exactly position you well, maybe you get something, you're in a situation that forces you to make a play. Garrett Wilson's that guy more so than Chris Olave to me, because if you look at his top catches compared to Olave's top catches, right? Olave likes to catch on the run more so, so he can make those plays where he goes up, and we've seen him do that before. But Wilson does that to another level, even sometimes when he probably shouldn't. So there's going to be a learning curve with both of them as they kind of adjust to the NFL level. But to me, Wilson looks like a number one. Olave is probably more of a support guy, a Z. So he'll play in the boundary. You can slide him out of the slot. You can use him a bunch of different ways. But I don't know if Olave will ever be a number one guy.
Right, and so but both of them, in this draft, this draft, we've got guys like we've got Drake London at USC, we've got
Yeah.
Jameson Williams at Alabama. We've got the kid from Arkansas. there are a lot of guys that are vying for those first round receiver grades. We didn't really talk about this one leading into the show, but how do you see this receiver draft maybe compared to some other ones?
So honestly, it's a very, very deep class, right? So you have there, like you mentioned, there's a lot of first round guys that are going to probably go in the first round. So if you look at Traylon Burks, like you mentioned, John Mechie might slide up in there. out of Alabama, Jameson Williams out of Alabama, Christian Watson could slide up in there, Jahan Dotson. So there's a lot of guys that could slide into the first round just based off of tape and everything we're hearing from the teams. Now, as it stacks up to other classes, you know recently we've kind of seen this explosion of the receiver position, right? Where a lot of receivers get picked, a lot of um, a lot of teams value that, and it's something that I kind of talked about a couple of years ago. I think going into right at the end of the 2020 season was that the position overall was devaluing because of the how many receivers there are, right? It used to be traditionally you had two, maybe three receivers on your team. Now you need three, really four, to be a successful passing offense because you're going to be rotating guys. You have so many different roles that they're playing in. Then you have the tight ends. You kind of have to have one of those now too. And I kind of akin it to a lot to the running back position where that's kind of devalued at this point, where it's that value is dropped in that position because everybody's running. You need three running backs to run a running back by committee, which 90% of the league is doing right now. So the biggest question with the receiver position is that where it's headed? Because it kind of looks that way. Outside of this off season, which has been insane, we'll get into that later. But like for the most part, you want younger receivers because they're cheaper. You can have more of them and potentially more talent. That's kind of pushed their value in the draft up, but after the draft, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to make that kind of money. But in terms of its stacking up, it's very deep. It's probably among the best that we've seen in the last 3, 4 years. We keep saying that every year, but we're not seeing 30, 40 guys, get drafted every year. And this is kind of one of those years where there's that many wide receivers that could get picked.
I want to talk a little bit about Ohio State specifically and its receiver legacy. I mean, you're putting two in this year. I mean, we can go in. Michael Thomas. We can talk about obviously Terry McLaurin. We can just go on and on and on and on. Is Ohio State kind of becoming a bit of a wide receiver I mean, we can go ahead to 23. Jackson Smith and Jigba will probably, rate very high in that one. I mean, Ohio State's receiver recruiting has been through the roof. I mean, talking about guys who are one year in or haven't even played. I mean, let's not even try and get to them in the NFL, but there are a lot of Ohio State receivers in the league right now. I mean, is Ohio State kind of becoming kind of a go-to in terms of a pipeline school for receivers to go to the next level?
Yeah, if you look at one of the things that you hear a lot when you first get into scouting and you start getting around and talking to NFL people is they say don't helmet scout. Take the school out of it. But you do have to take into consideration the fact that you have a receiver coach at Ohio State like Brian Hartline that's done such a great job over the last few years, not just recruiting guys but developing them and putting them in the league. So I think it's more of a coaches type thing, where Hartline is kind of that right now, that number one receiver guru guy that's in college football producing these players to the next level. So yeah, to a certain extent. And I think as long as Hartline is there, that's going to continue.
So we've talked about the receivers. Who is the next Buckeye off the board in your opinion? When I can go through some of the guys. I mean, on the offensive line, they got Nicholas Petit Frere, Thayer Munford. They got a tight end and Jeremy Ruckert. They got a couple of defensive linemen, Tyreek Smith, Haskell Garrett. They've all kind of. I've seen various grades on all of them, but from what you've seen, who do you think the next guy off the board is?
So after the two receivers, you're probably looking at Tyreek Smith coming off in the late second, early third. The edge rusher class this year is very deep. So I think if this is a normal year, we're talking about Tyreek Smith being a surefire second round pick. But you, he's that more traditional. You're going to play him down in a 4-man front, which is 80% of the league is running right now. So that's a good position to be at. And he's shown that explosive ability, especially with his first step and some of the other stuff. I'm going to pull up my notes on real quick to make sure that I've got this right. Um, he's got that first step that's really good, very explosive, excellent lateral quickness. He's got good speed, and he's a vicious tackler. He wants to punish people. And those are all good traits to have at that position. Um, so in his size, his length, he did really well down the Senior Bowl. I would expect him to come be off by the mid third round for sure.
CJ Stroud had a chance to throw to the receivers for Ohio State's pro day, and obviously he's not in the draft class of 22, but he will be in 23. I mean, any
Yeah.
Ohio State fan that thinks that they're going to get more than 1 year of CJ Stroud, I got a bridge to sell you. I got beachfront property to sell you in New Mexico. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Is there already buzz about him? I mean, obviously he finished fourth for the Heisman. A lot of people think it's going to be C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young competing for the Heisman this year. I mean, just kind of what were early reports coming out of Ohio State's pro day, because I'm sure there wasn't a single scout there. There wasn't a single person of NFL personnel that wasn't like, well, we really shouldn't be watching this kid because he's not eligible for the draft this year. So just pay no attention. We'll just watch everybody else.
No, and if you look at a lot of the teams right now that need a quarterback, they're not making any drastic moves to get one. With guys still on the market, you still have people like Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo, and I mean the list goes on. I think Blake Bortles, if you consider that an option, a valid option, he's on the market right now too. So point is, the quarterback position, there's talent there to be found that can be acquired, and these teams are not making those moves to get that talent. So because of that, I do think that there's a little bit of a we're kind of waiting till next year, because it's not just CJ Stroud that'll be there probably in the early first round at this point, but you've got Bryce Young right now. And Bryce Young is probably going to go first overall from out of Alabama, but you've got a better quarterback class next year with more talent. And a couple other names to kind of keep an eye on would be Phil Jurkovec of Boston College, and probably Sam Hartman of Wake Forest. And I think there's a guy in the big Spencer Rattler, obviously at South Carolina this year. So, point is, there's a lot more quarterback talent than in next year's class, and CJ Stroud is right up there among the top, and probably will be so. It's going to take a lot for him to not go in the top 10 this year.
Let's turn our attention here to a couple of NFL teams. And once again, you're watching the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by John Vogel of Football Sapient, and he's been gracious enough to give me some time to talk about the upcoming NFL draft. Can't talk about every team. We're going to talk, we're here in Columbus. I'm here in Columbus. So you got the Browns 2.5 hours north. You got the Bengals an hour 45 south. Those are going to be the two teams. Let's start with the Browns. They don't have a one. They had to give away a lot to Houston to be able to bring Deshaun Watson in. Their first pick's at 44. What could they hope to get there, and what do you see as pressing needs? I mean, the Browns certainly took a step backward last year. I mean, they're hoping that they shored some things up in terms of the quarterback position. They go out and make a splash in free agency. We'll talk about free agency here in a minute. There's so much has happened in terms of teams rosters, having significant seismic changes. But what is it that you think that they need to really look for in the draft?
You know, it's it makes sense why they made the move for Deshaun Watson from a football only standpoint. I've been very vocal about my opinion of Watson and the way that the NFL and the Browns have handled this. But all that aside, it makes sense why they went ahead and made the move now to get him and move this first round pick, because when you look at their roster on paper, there's not a glaring need that it kind of hits you and you're like, they need to address that. So, typically in your first round, you're taking a guy that you're going to try to play right away. And if he's not going to play right away, you're going to have a plan in place for him to take over. That's kind of the idea of the first round pick. Second round is when you start getting more into your depth. So when you look from a depth standpoint, they could use some interior talent. They're kind of weak. They're kind of thin right now. Defensive tackle. I would imagine they're going to address that before the end of free agency as well. And then also, defensive end's a little weak right now too. Until what I think Clowney hasn't re-signed yet, I don't think, right? Um, until he re-signs, if they manage to pull that together, from what I've heard, he's going to. Um, until that happens, they can still use that there too. But really, the position that makes most sense to me right now would be center. Um, they could use some help at the center position. I remember Nick Harris; he's projected to be the starter this year. Back at the Senior Bowl in 2020, there was a lot of concern about him because of his size. He's 6 foot, right around 300 pounds, and sometimes when you have a smaller center like that, they're easily overwhelmed. And I think we've seen that with Harris over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of different. I think they're going to kind of try to stay in the trenches. Someone to kind of keep an eye on might be, like an Alec Lindstrom out of Boston College. He's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. And then also the defensive side, well, honestly, somebody like Tyreek Smith would make sense there. Someone who could kind of be that versatile piece on the defensive front.
And we can't talk about the Browns without talking about the Bengals because they're again we're between the two cities, and the Bengals are
Yeah,
picking at 31. Obviously, came very close last year. Uh, offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. They address a lot of that in free agency, but that offensive line, some of the bad situations they put Joe Burrow in should be criminal. Do they continue? I mean, how deep do they have to go on offensive line in terms of the NFL draft, or do you see do you see something else? I mean, are they a team that's in a position to if there's a best player available that they can do that? I mean, have they done enough in free agency? I mean, what do they have to kind of do there?
what makes most sense is honestly, it's going to depend how the board falls. It's impossible to project how the board's going to fall to 31. So once we get to about pick number 25, we'll kind of sit there and evaluate, and kind of they'll start figuring out what they're going to do. Um, as of now, cornerback makes the most sense. Because you've addressed your entire, right side of your offensive line and center position already, through free agency. So you've got a really good left tackle in Jonah Williams. And if he can stay healthy, he's a very, very good left tackle, and someone that you want to kind of build that offensive line, that roster around. And the jury's still out on Jackson Carman, who played all right at left guard. He wasn't special, but you spent a second round pick on him last year, so you don't exactly want to throw him out the window either. So you kind of you're kind of set at offensive line for now. You have long term plans on the right side. You're going to kind of have to see how it works. So cornerback makes the most sense because you still got Eli Apple projected to be a starter, and nobody wants Eli Apple to be a starter in Cincinnati at this point. You're good in the slot, but you're going to kind of hope that you can get a corner kind of fall down the draft board. Somebody like maybe a Kyer a Lamb. Elam, I'm probably saying that wrong. Dang.
Yeah, Kyra Elam.
Yeah, Elam. So somebody like him would make a lot of sense right there. Or, maybe you get an Andrew Booth. It's very unlikely, but Andrew Booth could fall to that point. That's kind of who you're going to be targeting at 31, I think, is corner at this point.
What are some do you think that we're in store for any more surprises? I mean, draft day, it's a 3-day event now. I mean, round one is day one. Do you think that there are any fireworks left to be shot off? I mean, it has been just an insane free agency season. We've just seen so many trades. I mean, just recently, teams, packaging stuff to move up a spot. You obviously kind of know who they're trying to move themselves into a better position here or there. Do you think that there's some surprises left that we may, that we're going to go into draft night, or have they kind of, have they shot off the arsenal yet?
No, I think there's a whole lot more left. As crazy as that sounds right now, there's a whole lot more left of surprise. And it really comes down to, because this is a wild class in terms of people needing quarterbacks. There's only a couple guys that might pan out as starters. So the question becomes, where do teams value these guys? You got somebody like Malik Willis out of Liberty. This guy, he's an ungodly athlete, and he's got a great arm. Like, we saw him make the Zach Wilson throw, except I think he threw at 70 at his pro day. So he's got this crazy arm. He's crazy athletic. That's someone that, a team that needs a quarterback, maybe, Seattle or Carolina, somebody like that is sitting there kind of going, well, we could bet on this guy being our long term fix, because he's got the work ethic, he's got the temperament, he's got the tools. Now we need to refine that, and Matt Corral. So it really kind of depends on where this quarterback class is going to fall and how desperate teams are going to be to start moving to try to get those guys. Um, Draft night's going to be crazy. I would imagine there's going to be at least one more first round trade before we get to draft night, where there's going to be some picks moved around and some other crazy something. And it's all because the Rams just won a Super Bowl doing this kind of stuff.
I was going to say this free agency season has just been so wild. I mean, I don't even know. I was thinking about this leading up to the show. I was thinking about this as you were giving your last answer. Even what's been the biggest movement, the biggest thing to happen in this free agency season? And I don't know if I can even say that there's just one thing in particular. I mean, what are your thoughts just in general about just the volatility? I mean, you do mention that we saw the Rams do a lot of tinkering, and it got them the trophy. So I mean, just the free agency season in general.
You can't define this free agent series by one transaction, which is crazy. I think I think we're going to be looking years down the road from now, and there's going to be teams that win Super Bowls, and we're going to point back to this off season period and say, "Oh, that was the move that really helped them." Like whether it was Denver acquiring, Russell Wilson, whether it was the Chargers making the move for Khalil Mack, and just that division alone, is crazy. But I think we're going to look down the road. We're going to be like, maybe the Packers collapse over the next couple of years, and we're going to point at Devontae Adams trade as the problem. We're going to look at different things that happen over the next couple of years. It's all going to come back to this period. So it's really impossible to kind of say, yeah, there's one transaction that kind of stands out, and that's the defining thing of this period, because there isn't. There's been so many.
Once again, this is a Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by John Vogel, a football sapient. I want to thank John for his time. I'm going to wrap it up here on one last question. We're in the home stretch. The draft is close. How soon after the draft is done do you start preparing for 23, or are you already making motions in that preparation? Because I mean, the popularity of the NFL is, still sky high. It avoids a lot of the pitfalls that Major League Baseball does. Who doesn't know if it wants to work, if they don't want to work, or I mean, and even under the best of circumstances, football ratings are 10x anything else. So how quickly do you have to turn the tables onto 23?
It's I'll end up taking a week or two off. But no, the prep's already started. Like I've got my design, already set up, and I've already got a bunch of draft profiles started, and a lot of it is because it carries over from this year. You've got a bunch, the COVID season has really messed up a lot of different things in terms of eligibility. So you've got a lot more super seniors that they normally would have declared for the draft this year, but they had that extra year of eligibility, so they took it and they stayed. And so you'd already had some preliminary work done on them and just moved them over to next year. But it'll probably be a week or two that I'll take off right after the draft. But after that, it's getting right back into it, because NIL's changed everything in terms of like how early agents start getting involved with different prospects. We've got some agencies now that are already signing people, and helping them with their college stuff and the NIL, and making deals for them with that we normally didn't see. So I would imagine that my work will, because we work with a lot of agents and and agencies in general, and help them try to find talent. Um, I think it's going to end up starting very, very early, and like I said, a lot of the preliminary work has already been started.
And you talk about your work, John. I want to thank you for being part of the show. Tell everybody where they can find you, how they can follow you on social, and just so people who have more questions know where to get to you at.
Yeah. So Twitter would be at draft Vogel, and then footballsapient.com, NFLsapient.com. Either one will get you there. You just pull up. We I put all my work up there pretty much for the most part, and then my YouTube channel as well now that has the JDV experience, which Kevin, you were on about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we
Exactly.
had a great time talking Ohio State. And then also the film room is there as well, which is where we sit down with some NFL draft prospects and we talk about their tape while watching it, and it's pretty fun.
Well, there you go. So now you know where to find him. I'll be sure to link his information if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss a single show. If you're hearing us on the podcasting platforms, leave us a 5-star review. It certainly helps people find all of our great programming. John, I want to thank you for being part of the show, and everybody who is part of watching. I want to thank you for watching. I'm Kevin Noon. It's the Big Me Kickoff. We do this every week. Talk to you again here very soon.